All right. Hello, everyone. Good evening and welcome. Welcome to the broadcast. You were listening to Truth Warrior here on Truth Frequency Radio. Sorry, there was a slight little delay there, but we are live and we are on the air. And I'm your host, David Whitehead. I'm very happy to be here with you once again. It is Monday, December 16th, and my goodness, the time sure flies by, and we're now already coming up to the end of 2013, heading into 2014 already. So I'm hoping that we have a little bit more success in this year, 2014, with helping to awaken people up and trying to spread this information, inspire people to look at things in a different way, to take action. And we are here tonight. I'm joined tonight with Mark Passio from whatonearthishappening.com. I've always loved the name of that site because when you look around at things in the world, you can't help but just ask. If you have even a basic understanding of things, you're going to ask that question: what is happening? Because what we're told that's happening and what we see happening are two very different things. And I'm very excited to have him on to talk about exactly what is happening on this planet, because that's really what the goal is. We're here to discover truth. We're here to ask the deeper questions, and we're here to get into this whole new realm of thinking. And I think that as we're moving forward into this next year, it's definitely going to take a lot of tenacity. It's going to take a lot of courage on the part of most people to take that next step, to illuminate their minds, to move forward in their journey, and not just settle for maybe the first perspective they were given, or settle for the first answers that they were told by, especially those in what they call authority. And we're here to sort of break down a lot of the deceptions that are out there, especially within what has become known as the New Age community. There's a lot of deception at work there, definitely. I think there's a lot of good-hearted people that gravitate towards wanting to pursue knowledge and pursue truth and to go through this journey of awakening. But what tends to happen is that there's these nets that are there, and they know these people that are at the top, that are running these different elements within our society, whether it be the political system, the religious system, the education system, or any system. They're constantly trying to find ways to maintain their power. And so we see new branches of these different, I guess, what you would call religions or ways of thinking or philosophies. We see new branches coming out and new ideas coming forward, and it's just important that we analyze those and take a second look at what we're bringing on board into our minds and how we perceive things. So that's what we're here to do tonight. I'm very excited, and without further ado, I want to go ahead and bring my guest on tonight. So Mark, welcome to the show, brother, and you're on the air. Thank you for coming on the show with us tonight.
David, thank you so much for inviting me back on the show. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm so glad you accepted my invitation. I had listened actually recently to the amazing 7-hour presentation that you put together. I was over 7 hours actually, and it was basically pointing out a lot of these different deceptions that are at work within the New Age movement, and a lot of these memes that are out there today as if, you know, these are the new ideas that are being sold to people. And what ends up happening is that no matter which way you look at it, we've got a lot of people that are just not taking action. We have people that are talking a lot. We have a lot of people that might be inspired or motivated to bring about change in their life and hopefully in the world, but they get bought, they get sold.
Okay, I'm being told that we are back live. It looks like the call dropped, our connection dropped. David is being brought back into the call. David, are you back up?
Hello, Mark. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I'm actually just reconnecting through my phone. I'm assuming that we're actually live on the air. Thanks for getting me back on the air here.
Yes, it looks like your internet connection dropped out there. I was testing my connection thinking mine may have dropped, but mine was solid the whole time. So
yours is good. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we're still on the air, so we'll just go with this for now until the break, and then I'll try to get my other signal lined up there. So sorry about that, folks.
Oh, no problem. Hey, technical difficulties happen in this business. You know, it happens.
Oh, yeah. We don't have the multi-millions of dollars to have these really secure networks and all of this. So anybody that's listening, of course, people like Mark and myself, we do this on our own dime and on our own time, and it can be, a little bit stressful from time to time. But
that's right.
This is what it's all about. It's grassroots. It's people getting together, and we're just using the best technology that we have at our disposal to try to get this very important message out. So I'm not sure at what point we were cut off there, Mark, but I was just trying to basically bring up the subject that we definitely wanted to talk about tonight, which was the subject of the deceptions that are at work, especially right now. And I'm sure you can feel this and you can see this happening, but as this movement has grown of awareness and people wanting to seek truth and not just accept what they're given from these establishment sources or from these authority figures or from what they're getting from churches or whatever, it seems to be that there's these other nets that are forming to catch those people and to draw them in to these deceptions. And these deceptions are things like, not standing up and not taking action. There's this meme out there, which is, very much rampant in the New Age movement, which is, what you resist persists. So don't resist. Just sit back, be complacent, focus only on yourself, and everything will just heal on its own. Evil is a natural part of this reality, so there's really nothing we can do to fix it, so all you can do is work on yourself. And it just seems to be that people take that very literally and they don't apply it any further, and I feel like it's sort of taking the wind out of the sails of this movement of people really trying to stand up to the system and to take positive action. So maybe we could start with that and get your take on how that manifested.
Absolutely. I call this entire movement the religion of standing down. That's really what they're peddling to the masses of people who buy into this movement. And again, as you said, they're very often well-intentioned individuals. They can often see the control system that's in place. They can see a lot of the evil and the things that really shouldn't be the way that they are in our world. And they have a lot of intention to want to do good and to want to change themselves above all, and those are both great things. But when it comes to actually standing up for oneself and one's rights and taking a stance against people who are doing things that aren't within their rights, this idea that that we don't have a right to stand up for our rights and stop those who would attempt to thwart our rights is rampant within the New Age community. In other words, what their main ideology seems to be is that is being peddled to them is all of the violence that is done to us can be done to us, but we may never resist that violence physically with any amount of physical force. And that's a very dangerous precedent to set, that there is never a time to use physical force, a highly, highly dangerous precedent. Because if you don't understand both principles of enlightenment, it is my contention that you are not enlightened, that you are absolutely unconscious, and you are being led down the garden path, as it were, to really down the path to the road to slaughter. There's two basic principles that have to be understood deeply and observed deeply when it comes to truly being awake. And I think that any individual that does not wholly recognize both of these principles is not awake at all whatsoever. And, many people will hear this and they'll hear it as harsh, and they'll, say, well, that's not what I was taught, or this isn't what my guru told me or my teacher told me. And I keep trying to explain to people that if a so-called spiritual teacher is not teaching people both of these principles in a very, very fundamental way, then they're a false teacher. They're not really teaching people true spiritual enlightenment. They're teaching them either some form of aggression or some form of pacifism, both of which are what we're trying to actually eliminate. We don't want any sort of aggression. We want people to recognize the non-aggression principle. The non-aggression principle is very simple. Do not initiate coercive force against your fellow beings. That's it. Very simple. It can't be any simpler than that. The person who is initiating or starting the usage of coercive force against another being is in the wrong 100% of the time. They are not correct in what they are doing. They are committing a wrongdoing, and that is against natural law. But coincident with that principle, you need to truly deeply understand the self-defense principle, which is the principle that if another being is initiating undue coercive force against you and your rights, you maintain at all times and places the right to physically and forcefully defend yourself with the defensive use of force to put down that act of aggression. That is a defense of your rights, a defense of your property, a defense of your being, life, liberty, and property. And a lot of people in the New Age community are sold the notion that that right does not exist, or that it should never be exercised, and we should allow all this buildup of aggression against us and our rights and our freedoms, and there should never be a physical pushback against that. Now, I'm not telling you go and try to immediately, do some sort of armed insurrection. That's not what I'm saying. I think we need to attempt to do this in consciousness and change people's understanding about what is right and wrong, what is morality, what is natural law, what action should I not be engaged in. That's getting this done in consciousness, which I still believe there is a chance to do. Otherwise, I wouldn't even be talking. But what's going on within the New Age movement is the idea that the response, the defensive response to an act of violence is also an act of violence. That's the ideology. That's the idea that they're trying to sell people in the New Age movement, that both of those acts would be constituted as an act of violence. So what really has to be understood, if we're to be truly aware and awake and truly enlightened and have a real deeply in what true spirituality really is we have to understand that there is a complete difference, a polar opposite difference between violence and the usage of defensive force. So, for example, if an attacker were to accost me on the street with a knife and demand that I give them whatever valuables I have on my possession, bow down before the attacker and, basically be submissive to this person and give them all of my possessions and do whatever he demands. That's the initiation of coercive force, which is called violence. That individual never has or ever had that right to engage that act. And upon them taking it, they forfeit their right to remain unharmed. So we have a right to remain unharmed by default, so long as we're not engaging in violence against someone else. Once we engage violence against somebody else, that right is forfeited to that person, and then they have the right to choose whether to engage in defensive force or not. And what the New Age movement is trying to tell people, for the most part, I would say it's a generalization for sure, but it largely holds true. They're trying to tell people that the right to defensively then engage in force doesn't exist, that if one were to take that position, to take that action, that they would also be engaged in violence. And this is a very important, yet it can be a subtle distinction to understand the difference between those two dynamics. Many people in the New Age movement don't understand the distinction. Many people in the police don't understand that distinction. Many people in government don't understand that distinction. Many just average individuals, in our communities don't understand that distinction. And it's a very critical distinction to comprehend. When you are defending yourself, once violence has already been done unto you, you are not engaging in an act of violence. That's very critical to understand, and it's hard for a lot of people to understand that. I recognize that. But in other words, if I were to take out a weapon and use it against that attacker who had mugged me on the street and attempted to take all my possessions, okay, if I were to respond with defensive usage of force, it would not be an act of violence. And I'm talking about up to and including deadly force. Because if they used potential deadly force against me through weaponry, or even through just beating someone, you hear so much about this this ridiculous and completely low consciousness, vulgar game, so-called, quote-unquote, that's being played, this knockout game that you hear about on Facebook and other social media networks. That's an act of violence that could kill somebody. People don't understand how fragile the human head is. Somebody gets knocked out and falls to the ground, they hit their head, they could be dead, they could be in a coma, they could be brain dead, just like that. That's engaging in an act of violence that is a potentially deadly act. Just walking up and striking someone, completely taking them blindsided, because they're not going to be in a fighting mode. They're going to be in a relaxed musculature mode, and if they get knocked out by an extreme blow to the head like that, they could very easily fall to the ground, literally like a sack of potatoes, hit their head on the concrete and die. And I think it has happened with several people. I think there's already several incidents where people have been killed by this ridiculousness, which I think is personally a social engineering, act that is put out there. This whole meme is just put out there for unconscious people to latch onto and then go out and emulate it. It's if you ask me, it's an entire psyops, mind control tactic, probably dreamed up by people at Tavistock Institute of Human Relations or some other globalist think tank organizations.
Well, that's no coincidence that it comes out on the heels of this new Grand Theft Auto video game and a lot of these other video games and very extremely violent movies and television shows that are out there, and it's young people that are watching these things. No matter how much they try to rate it and say, oh, this is restricted viewing, it doesn't matter. I talk to these kids. I work with these kids a lot, and it's all young kids that are being influenced by this, and then they want to go out there and emulate that, because you got the Hollywood celebrities, the musicians, and everybody just emulating this attitude of dominance and ego, and it's okay to treat women like this, and it's okay to all you're going to do is go out there and look for the almighty dollar and step on your fellow man to get there. That's the way to get up to the top, and this is something that's encouraged. So yeah, absolutely, this is a product of that overall conditioning, and there could be very well something more behind how they put this out there, but it's absolutely horrific to see, and to see that people would actually stand there and just go, well, those people are having their experience, and you just have to go along your way, and they don't even think about taking any form of defensive action, psychologically or physically, against these types of attacks that are very prevalent.
Exactly, and you know what this really highlights the difference between the it underscores the difference between the understanding of the non-aggression principle combined with the principle of self-defense versus the ideology of pacifism. These are two completely different notions. One is a balanced approach, and one is a extreme right-brained imbalanced approach. So we could look at it in a threefold way, really. And if you just follow this breakdown, the extremely overly left-brained approach is the aggression ideology, that it's okay to do acts of coercive force, aggression in other words, toward your fellow human beings to get your way. That would be a very left-brain modality, a very left-brain imbalanced worldview, way of looking at life in general. I would call that, in general, violence ideology or aggression ideology, which is a very, very left-brained imbalance. Together with that, you have the opposite form of imbalance. You have a very extreme right-brained imbalanced approach. That is the ideology known as pacifism. And right off the bat, I just want to emphatically say, I'm not a pacifist. I think pacifist is one of the most loathsome ideologies in the world. I think it's as loathsome as violence. It's as loathsome as the violence ideology, as those who want to preemptively go do violence to other people, or people who just look at the most ruthless and brutal are the ones who are the alphas and they come out on top, and that's how it should be. Violence ideology, aggression ideology, whatever you want to call that, male dominator mindset is totally and utterly loathsome. It's based on self-loathing. These people are trying to compensate for how much they psychologically hate themselves. Way down deep in the subconscious mind, they are self-loathing individuals who ultimately hate themselves. The same is true for pacifists. I want to just say that absolutely emphatically. There is no difference in what's going on underneath the surface, except it's a different form of brain imbalance, and we can pick that up on the other side of the break. Okay, I think we're back on.
Oh, are we on? Yeah, okay. Oh,
yes, there we go.
All right, and I think we're back from break and everything. Hold on, let me just see here. Bear with us, folks, if we're on the air. We are on the air. Okay, perfect. We just had a big slew of technical difficulties there. It's all on my end. I live in Toronto, Canada, and we were just blasted recently with a snowstorm, so I'm wondering if that was playing into my internet issues. So if we drop out again, don't worry, we will be back. We are going to make this show happen, and we are here tonight with my very special guest, Mark Passio, and his website, of course, is whatonearthishappening.com. And Mark, before we got cut off by the break there, we were just breaking down the whole concept of pacifism, and you were explaining how that is one of these ideologies that has been obviously used by these different control groups that have always been preying over the minds of the population in order to maintain their control. So maybe we could continue where we left off with that.
Yeah, this all comes down to different forms of brain imbalance. So you have the left brain imbalance consciousness. That is what you would call master think, maybe, or just violence and aggression. And I already said before the break, this is a totally deplorable way of living. It's a deplorable form of consciousness. It is something that I loathe and detest, and I think should go away from human consciousness forever. Equally deplorable to that, however, is the notion of pacifism. This is just the opposite form of brain imbalance. This is right brain imbalance, or what one might call slave think. Okay? So this is what the controllers want. They always want to create a aggressive, callous, so-called master think class, okay? A subset of the population that's going to go and do violence upon command. And then they want another group of the population that is totally trapped in the right brain modality that will never stand up for their rights and will lay down to that aggression, lay down to that enslavement. Okay, so that's slave think. This form of right brain imbalance takes the form of pacifism. And pacifism is the ideology. I don't call it a philosophy because there's nothing wise about it. Philosophy, by definition, comes from the Greek language philos, meaning love, and sophos, meaning wisdom, the love of wisdom. There's nothing wise about pacifism. It's just as unwise as violence and aggression. It just plays into that overall dynamic of master and slave, a world of masters and slaves. So what pacifism is the notion that no matter how much violence is done unto you, you will never use the defensive use of force against the one who is accosting you or the group that is accosting you and doing violence unto you. So in other words, it's saying you will never physically stand up for rights which you possess. You will allow someone to come and take them, to take rights. You will allow someone to come and take property. You will allow someone to even come and take life. And I find that one of the most deplorable ideologies that can exist on the earth, or anywhere else for that matter. So,
and if I may interrupt you quickly there, Mark, because I think that this is also an important point, is that this isn't always just physical, is it? I mean, this is also displayed in the way people just back down when authority figures come around, like, you know, police or military or any so-called someone in a position of authority. They come along and they start ordering you around and getting you to become subservient to them. Right. And we see the same mentality displayed there. So they're not even going to defend themselves physically, of course, but not even psychologically or verbally to stand up and say and speak their mind and to say, no, I'm going to say no to this. I don't agree with it. Here's my line in the sand. So we see this displayed all across the board here.
See, it would be even more accurate, David, to call this passivism. P-A-S-S-I-V-I-S-M, passivism. You know, you notice that that's a word play there that fits perfectly with what pacifism, supposedly based on the Latin, the etymology of the word pacifism based on the Latin word for peace, pax, P-A-X. But really, it's so telling that when we're saying the word pacifism, we're saying the word passivism. Okay, it's being passive and laying down when aggression is being done unto you. And you could even see it in other ways of being passive. It doesn't even have to be with the so-called authority figures. The New Agers are passive even in people that they encounter in life that, that they don't want to get up in their face about their wrong behavior, about their aggressive or violent behavior. They want to just say, oh, they'll learn it in their time, or that's not for them to understand now, or they've made a choice not to be awake now or not to hear this now. Well, what if the real case is they're not learning this because no one's challenging them on their horrific behavior, on their horrible behavior? No one's getting up in their face. Too many people are being too passive and not challenging people on these behaviors that are completely immoral. I like the word passivism even more than pacifism. Now, see, there's this balanced approach. As with all dialectics and dichotomies, there's often a third approach that transcends both and is true, is not one of these dialectics that's trying to steer people down a path that leads to enslavement. It's that often that third path that breaks that dichotomy and breaks that dialectic that can lead to actual freedom and liberation. And this is what I would call the two pillars of enlightenment. And again, it's taking an aspect that is left-brained, taking an aspect that is right-brained, combining them both together in a state of non-duality, of putting them together in a way that is balanced, okay? And you can call it many different names. I've called this in my lectures and radio series the two pillars of enlightenment, okay? Other people have called them the masculine principle and the feminine principle, or the sacred masculine principle and the sacred feminine principle. Other researchers or philosophers have called them the non-aggression principle combined with the self-defense principle, because that's what this really is about. So you have the non-aggression principle. It's been described as the sacred feminine principle, okay, of these two principles or pillars of enlightenment, if you will. And again, we saw earlier that simply means do not initiate undue and unrightful usage of an initiation of force against your fellow beings. That's it. Don't start any coercive action toward another person. Once you're doing that, you've stepped into the realm of aggression, and that's not a right. That's a wrongdoing. And you combine the negation of aggression, or the non-aggression principle, you combine that with the self-defense principle. This is the sacred masculine principle. This is the left brain aspect, okay? You're saying, if my rights, my property, my life are accosted by violence, I am not going to passively stand there and just allow that act of aggression to go uninhibited, to go unresponded, not respond to it, to just allow it to be done with complete impunity. No, you're going to use whatever defensive use of force is required to put down that act of aggression. And I would include up to and including deadly force if it's necessary, depending on the type of aggression that is used against you. So, and I say that is an absolute human right. It is an absolute human right that is not gifted to humanity by man and can never be taken away from humanity by man. And this is what so many governments and people in government and people in many religions and people in the New Age movement and a lot of your average people on the street simply do not recognize that is a natural, inherent human right to defend oneself. And now when you go into that deeper, you understand that since certain types of weaponry exist, that nobody can say to someone else, you may not defend yourself with a particular type of weapon. That is someone's decision to make for themselves, depending on how they want to defend themselves. It would be the equivalent of trying to take away, for example, an automatic or semi-automatic weapon, a battle rifle, from someone in the modern day, okay, would be the equivalent of attempting to disarm someone with a stone in perhaps 100,000 years ago or more, or to take away the ability for someone to defend themselves with a dagger or a sword or a slingshot, 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago. In today's world, this is the most modern personal weaponry that is available with technology that we have. And you could get into all of the arguments about whether, wouldn't it be a beautiful world for things like that not to exist and for people not to ever use anything like that to do harm to someone else. That's a moot point because they do exist. And for someone to say you may not have a particular weapon is slavery. If you were to go back in medieval times and say you may not possess a sword, you're doing that, you're disarming that person because you're saying you are a particular class of people that is to be controlled. You may not have the ability to ever use this type of weapon against someone else. That's slavery. You're putting them into a class that is lower than other people who you're elevating above them and saying you have special rights that trump this person's rights, and therefore at some point, if you did will to do them violence, they would have no means of being able to defend themselves. This is what disarmament has always been about. Disarmament has never been about the actual weapon, whether it's taking that stone away from a Neolithic human being, or taking a sword away from a medieval human being, or taking a battle rifle away from a modern human being. It has always been about control and slavery. It has never been about just that thing, that particular weapon. Sword control back in medieval times was slavery, ladies and gentlemen. It wasn't about the sword, it was about control. Gun control in the modern day isn't about the guns, it's about the control. It's a form of taking away the ability of someone to engage in the self-defense principle, which is a natural human right if they come under attack by violence. And I think it's something that has to be understood at a very deep philosophical level, and unfortunately, not only don't many people understand it, many people seem to have their minds so dumbed down and so brainwashed by modern propaganda of the state that they seem incapable of understanding this as a natural human right.
Oh, most definitely. And we have seen, if you go back and look throughout history, that's what we've seen. We've seen kings and queens and rulers and whatever just taking over the ability of the average human being to defend their property, to defend their land, because of course it doesn't serve the interest of the tiny few that have, they have maybe more advanced technology, but they don't have the numbers of military or paid military soldiers to go out and enforce these laws that they want to bestow upon the people. So the best thing to do is to keep them starving, keep them working, dumb them down, keep them in fear, and also to keep them disarmed. So, I've studied martial arts my whole life, and a lot of the weapons that I actually train with, they come from farmers, farm tools that they were forced to find a way to develop a weapon they could use to defend themselves because they were disarmed. They weren't allowed to carry the sword, they weren't allowed to carry the spear or to carry the bow and arrow. So they had to develop farm tools and to secretly train methodologies of how to defend themselves. Some of them were even disguised in dances and routines like that, so that if they were working as slaves in the field, it didn't look like they were actually training a method of self-defense, but it was there. So we do see that throughout history, we've always had these rulers trying to enforce these rules, and then we've had these slaves that have constantly been trying to find ways to free themselves. And I don't think that really there's any difference with what we're seeing today.
Absolutely. It's the same thing, history just repeating itself because people still haven't learned the lesson that it was attempting to teach them through the suffering that has always happened in the past through these acts of confiscation of weapons, always inevitably followed by some type of genocide or Holocaust. And all you need to do is do a cursory examination of even modern past history to understand that. How many different societies has gun confiscation been done in the last 100 years, followed by a genocide? Look at Armenia. Look at what happened in Nazi Germany. Look at what happened in the Soviet Union. Look at what happened in Cambodia. It's just unbelievable that people still don't see the pattern. And the reason they don't see the pattern is one word: religion and mind control. You know, they're the same thing. Religion, really any form of religion. And when I say that, there's this visceral reaction because people have their cultural religions, whether it be Islam or Judaism or Christianity or Hinduism, okay? I'm not even talking about cultural religion, okay? When I use the word religion, I'm talking about that which is nested in the mind, okay, as a piece of malware for the brain. All right? And what it does is it holds you back from an understanding of a vital principle. That's what I'm talking about as religion. And you can even see this and by any definition, that's called mind control. Okay? If we strip away the euphemism for it, we could call it a religion, we could call it brainwashing, we could call it, tricky persuasion that is being used against somebody. But if we strip away all the euphemisms, it's called mind control. So, really, all these forms of mind control that are used against us are religions. And there's a couple of really basic overarching religions that are universal religions. They're separate and distinct from the world religions, the cultural religions, if you will. Okay? We're not talking about Christianity, Hinduism, Judaism, Islam, etc. Okay? We're talking about universally held belief systems that are next to impossible to break down because they're so calcified in the human mind. They've been with us so long, and they're so deeply entrenched in the mind that we don't know what we can't even envision or imagine as a species what life would be like without these control systems in place. So I call the two overarching and universal world religions authority and money. Authority and money. Authority being actually the lesser of the two and the slightly less universally believed in notion. Money is the number one universal religion on this planet. There is no more universally held belief that is deeply entrenched in the majority of the human population, more so than the belief in the reality of money and a monetary system. That's the number one world religion that it has infected almost every human being on the earth. The second biggest world religion is authority. This is the notion that a certain group of human beings or a certain individual, for that matter, doesn't matter whether you look at it as being vested in an individual or being vested in a group. This subclass of humanity has the moral right to issue commands to others. And the others, who are their subjects or their slaves, have a moral obligation to obey those commands that are issued by that a group of human beings. That's called authority. And again, it's just a euphemism. It's just a euphemism. If we're really being honest with ourselves about what the notion of authority is, it is slavery. If we're stripping away all the nice terms that you could call it, okay? If we're being honest with ourselves, the notion of authority that one group of people may command another group of people is called slavery. So we have these two dynamics at play, okay? Mind control and slavery. Mind control keeps slavery going, or if you will, if we want to take that, we could use the euphemism that's in place for mind control, religion, that which holds us back. And again, the etymological root of the word religion is from the Latin language, religare. Religare, if you look it up in any Latin reader or Latin dictionary, the term religare means to tie back, to hold back, or to thwart from forward progress by binding or tying up so that you cannot move forward. You're bound in one place. Okay, that's what religion, false religion, does. And I'll qualify that. I'll say a false religion. And that doesn't mean I believe in any particular cultural religion. Okay, as if Christianity, Judaism, Hindu, Islam, Buddhism, etc., I wouldn't throw in there and classify as false religions, because I think really anything that ends in an ISM and ism, okay, is going to hold somebody back and not get them to see the bigger picture if they're only using that as a framework through which to understand truth.
Well, there's even the political stage, and even if you look at even what's going on within the medical establishment, or any of these other establishments, they're creating these memes which are technically could be regarded as a religion.
That's right. I absolutely consider politics a religion. That's the religion that believes in authority of man. Okay, I absolutely believe in the scientism movement. That the scientism is a religion. It's not real science. It's science that is interested in protecting a paradigm, whether or not that paradigm has actually been proven to be false or something that completely does not serve humanity or move humanity forward in any way, shape, or form. It's a belief system that needs to be protected at all costs. That's what politics is. That's what cultural religions are. That's what scientism is. That's what the New Age movement is. And of course, that's what the one universal religion that binds them all together is money. The biggest and strongest religion on the face of the earth. But, if we're talking about how different religious modalities, and I mean binding modalities, okay, using religion in the term as binding, work upon the mind. They work and create mind control, create calcified, hardened belief systems to keep us in slavery in one way or another, okay? So if you look at the overarching form of religion that is used to get a chronically left-brained person to stay chronically engaged in that left-brain modality. So I would say this is the religion that keeps us bound in a left-brain modality and binds the right brain out of the way. What it's used to do is tie back the right mind, okay, and tie back the compassionate, the intuitive, the nurturing, the empathetic aspects of the personality. Okay, and what they're using this religion to do is to build the left brain prison. All right, that's the religion called government. Government is the system of religion that is used on the left brain, and it binds the right brain out of the way. Now, again, for any dialectical system of slavery to work efficiently and effectively, you have to have the other polarizing dialectic. You have to have the other force that goes up against that force. So, when I say going up against it, I mean it works on the opposite modality of the brain. So it's doing the same basic thing. It's keeping someone in a calcified belief system that leads to slavery, but you're doing it on the opposite side of the brain. So this modality of mind control works through the right brain to imbalance it greatly and keep somebody in the right brain, and then it binds the left brain out of the way. Okay, so it takes down someone's analytical capabilities. It takes down their focusing capabilities, their ability to really get in and see the details. Whereas binding the right brain out of the way through left brain modality of religion, government, being a controller, will bind out of the way the big picture pattern thinking that the right brain makes possible. So this right brain modality form of religion that we're talking about here, okay, it is the cultural religions, okay, and the New Age movement combined. On the left-hand side, I would say you have the political systems and you have the scientism religion. So there's really two religions for each side of the brain overall, two boxes for consciousness. On the left side, you have, again, government and you have scientism. On the right side, you have the cultural religions of all kinds, and then you have the New Age movement for those who don't fall into the mentality of buying into the cultural religions. And that's what the New Age movement is for. It's a catch-all. In other words, if people aren't falling into these other boxes called the cultural religions that send them into the right brain form of imbalance of slavery, okay, of accepting servitude and slavery, then for those who fall out of those little boxes, they don't fit into the paradigm of cultural religion like Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, etc., okay, you catch them in the net called the New Age movement. The New Age movement is a right brain polarizing mind control modality. It's a right brain polarizing mind control modality. Okay? And its characteristics are simply to eliminate and destroy action. That's its overarching characteristics. We want to put down the left brain. We want to put down the sacred masculine principle, the sacred masculine elements of the personality, such that the person will lay down, accept everything, okay, never resist, buy into all kinds of authority, never challenge anybody on their nonsensical belief systems, okay, and just basically prostrate themselves before authority of all kinds. All right, that's what the New Age movement is there to do. It's there to get people to become ultra passive. And again, pacifism is a big part of New Age belief systems.
And that's exactly what we see, Mark. We see this pacifist mentality where people are just sitting back and doing nothing. And on that note, we're going to head to break here. But folks, we have hour 2 coming up with Mark Passio. We're going to continue to break this very important topic down for you. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back in a few minutes. Stay put. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're tuned into hour number 2 here on Truth Warrior. And we are broadcasting live from truthfrequencyradio.com. And I'm your host, David Whitehead. And it looks like my internet connection is up and running. So hopefully we don't have any more interruptions in this segment. I can't tell you enough how important it is for people to really grasp the big picture here when we're talking about these subjects. My guest tonight is Mark Passio, and his website is whatonearthishappening.com, and he has a ton of information on his website. You can go and check out his past podcasts. You can go on YouTube and check out his many very well put together videos that are detailing all this information that we're discussing with you. I've personally been affected greatly by Mark's work. I think he's done a tremendous job, and he's really helped to wake me up to a lot of these different elements that we're really discussing here. And what we're talking about is trying to break free from these chains that are binding us down, that are holding us back. Because I really look at it like this. I think that the human race is really just straining at its chains to try to fully realize its potential. And of course, there's always those mechanisms that are put in place by the system, by design, to hold that growth back and to hold back that progress. And that's exactly what we were talking about in the first hour, is some of these different methodologies, some of these different modalities that exist within these different structures of thought. And that's exactly what they are. They are structuring your thought process. They are regimenting your thought process, as some of these different Madison Avenue types would say, or Edward Bernays types would say. And these, of course, are the people that have been working on mind control for years, for hundreds, if not thousands of years, the different ways to guide the minds of the masses of people, because they know that that's where the power lies. And I find it interesting that one of the elements that Mark brought up was, of course, the monetary system as well, because that seems to go hand in hand with a lot of these different religious systems. It also goes hand in hand with a lot of these different political or oligarchical type systems, where you have basically the few at the top finding different ways of controlling the majority of people on the planet so that they can ultimately control the resources of this planet, which they would include humanity as one of those resources. And so what we're trying to do is break away. And I really want to clarify for people, if they maybe missed a couple of the first minutes of our discussion, that we're both, Mark and I, we've talked before, and I studied his work, and I'm very much on the same page as him, and I'm sure he would agree with me that we are here actually promoting peace. We do not want war. We do not want violence or aggression. We do not want to see this continuation of carnage and disorder that's taking place on this planet. And we're trying to right that. We're trying to inspire people. And I think that when I look at this, I think that if we're going to do that, if we're really going to bring that about, we need to take a balanced approach and to heal the wounds that we've all suffered within our own minds, within our own beings. If we can't walk around as whole-brained people that are connected to the planet around them, connected to the natural laws that govern this planet and this universe, if we can't be connected to that and operating in a holistic way, how the heck can we create any kind of positive change? So it does start with the individual. So in that sense, I agree. People should work on themselves. They should develop these different ways of being and understanding. But we're talking about extremes here. We're talking about people that are really just trying to find another way to get out of this. They wake up, and I understand this. They wake up and they see how horrific this system really is underneath. They take a couple peeks behind the curtain. They don't like what they see. And even though they're aware of it, it tends to be that they run to the nearest savior, whether it's a religious savior or some kind of ideology that's going to save them from having to look at the darkness that's there, that needs to be addressed. And it just ultimately becomes various forms of escapism. And you have these different two extreme ways of achieving that. And these professional, we call them pros. We're playing a game here, and the people we're playing against are pros. They know exactly what they're doing. They've studied human consciousness much more than any average person has, to a very, very high degree. They know us better than we know ourselves, which gives them a great deal of an advantage on the playing field. And so what we're trying to do is take that knowledge back to empower ourselves. Physically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, in every sense, trying to balance out this system, get rid of these weeds that are, crawling up and destroying the flowers of our consciousness. And I think that that's really where I find some great inspiration in Mark's work. So, Mark, welcome back, brother, and let's continue where we left off there at the break.
David, thanks so much, and you're right on point. That's exactly what all forms of religion really are there to do. It's there to stifle positive action. It's there to hold someone in a belief system by which they're not actually doing something physically in the world to make a change for the better. They're just hoping for it or praying for it or meditating for it. Okay? And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say every aspect of anything, of any teachings that are taught in the New Age movement, or religion for that matter, are bad. That's not what I'm saying. This isn't a blanket statement. There's actually very many really good, positive teachings that are taught in all different religions and in the New Age movement as well. Okay? And you have to use discernment. And you have to understand where you're being fed a line of BS, and you need to recognize that for what it is, and say, I'll take this thing over here, which is actually good, and it's nutrient dense. It's good for me. I could take this into myself, and it's nutritious, and I should take that into myself and digest it, and something positive will come out as a result. But you need to be discerning, and when something comes along that it just doesn't quite feel right, and it definitely smacks of some kind of control mechanism that is there to take you off the path to truth, then you have to be able to use that discernment and say, hey, I'm not going to accept that. I'm not going to take it into myself. I'm not going to take a bite out of that, because it's going to do harm in the long run. And that's how the New Age movement is. It's a subtle deceiver. It's a subtle deception. I call it, and many other researchers have called it this. It's not, I haven't coined this phrase. I don't know who coined this phrase. I'd like, if somebody knows, I'd like to know who did. But the New Age movement has been called by different researchers who have talked about its subtle deceptions. The last cul-de-sac before the gold mine of true spirituality, of real spiritual gold. Okay, that lies at the end of the path and journey to truth. And we are taken off of that path through this modern variant of the New Age movement. And I always put new in quotation marks too, because there's nothing new under the sun, as the old saying goes. And that means everything that, all the truth has already been here, and all the deceptions have already been here. There's nothing new. I'm not going to, you go on my website, I tell people you're not going to learn anything new. It's all been here with humanity since time immemorial. The truth has always been here, and the lie has always been here. It's up to us to recognize it and be discerning between the two. So I put new in quotations because this is an old world deception. This is another variant of what was called the old world order, which was ruled by religion, ruled by purely turning people into the right brain imbalance, okay, the right brain imbalance modality. And that's called religion. And that was the old world order. You were ruled by a king, a priest king, some sort of a dark shaman, or some sort of a cult-like leader. Okay, and that was how the ancient world was simply ruled. It was one person at the top, authority vested in one. Everybody else just believed in that authority. That was their religion. That was their God for all intents and purposes, and they couldn't refuse his orders. And he ran a entire subclass of minions that would kill on command. We think we're so different today. We think the world is so different today. The world is nothing, and nothing has changed at all. Nothing. All we've done is change the names. And we've divested that quote-unquote authority. Instead of putting it into the hands of one human being, one person, one being, we've just diffused it a little bit into a group of people who we call government. They still sit up at the top of that same hierarchy of authority and violence. And, the concept of authority is vested in that group. And they rule over all the people who are their subjects or their slaves. And they have a subset of sick, psychopathic individuals who are their henchmen to do their bidding for them, just like the king or the priest king did in the ancient world. And nothing has changed, except we now call it government. Instead of calling it a king or a pope or a priest king, we now call it a government. The authority's been diffused a bit into multiple people that call themselves members of the government, and the subjects are just called the citizenry, and it's ruled by violence in the same way, with the same set class of people who are willing to take orders and do whatever violence they're commanded to do to keep the other slaves in line. Nothing has changed from the old world order to the new world order. So when I put this I always put quotes around the word new in New Age movement, because it's a very old paradigm. There's nothing new in it. It's a religion just like every other cultural religion has been. It's a framework for control. And many researchers on the topic have called it the last cul-de-sac before the gold mine, meaning a dead end kind of with no outlet, which it retards the flow of real information, and it retards the flow of true spiritual awakening. And like you said, David, the people who gravitate toward this movement have good intentions, and they just want things to work out, and they want a savior, and this is their savior. The savior is the New Age movement. The savior is meditating for peace instead of actually teaching the true difference between the non-aggression principle and self-defense principle combined versus the violence ideology. Instead of really trying to hammer that home into people, I can't be forceful with my ideas and tell people that they believe in nonsense if they believe in statism, which is essentially just a euphemism for slavery. That would make people feel uncomfortable. I can't be aggressive like that. I have to be passive and let them have their belief system. That's a big part of this belief system called the New Age movement. I mean, we could look at specific deceptions that are contained in this movement and break them down. You look at the idea that, you should never pay attention to anything that's negative. Ignore the negative. Don't look at that. That's going to make you upset, and that's just going to bring on more of the negative. And people actually believe this. They actually really deeply, genuinely believe that if you pay attention and learn about the negative things that are going on in the world to a point where you really have a good handle on all the different multifaceted methodologies of control, of pollution, of dumbing people down, of looking at GMOs, looking at poisons in food, chemicals in the water, in the air, etc. Okay, they'll say, don't look at all of that, and certainly don't try to resist all of that. See, it's about not taking action and not resisting. But the first thing they try to get you to do is to ignore anything that's so-called bad or negative. All right, so. And I'm not saying there aren't negative things. And if you get too focused on them, if you get obsessed with them, yes, it can be draining. It can be devastating. If you're just focusing on that and not being effective by trying to combat it and do something about it. that is positive. Okay, there has to be balance here, and I'm not telling people just go and look into the abyss and do nothing else. You have to be aware of that abyss, that deep darkness that's here with us, but not be obsessed with it. Okay, and make that the focus of everything in your day and in all of your energy.
Well, it's like you said before, it absolutely has to be based from a point of view of balance. And I think that because this is the way I explain it to people, and that is that because of the amount of this corruption and tyranny and greed and what you would call darkness or evil, to use that language, because we see so much of that running rampant, what we're seeing here is signs that we need to address the core problem. It'd be like if your body just suddenly starts showing signs of weakness or illness, you might want to go and check out and see if there could be a cause that's there, some kind of a disease or some kind of an ailment or an injury even that you need to address. You could say, you know what, I don't really want to pay attention to that because it's killing my Zen thing, man. It's killing my mojo. It's breaking down my spirit. But really, if you think about it, it's just going to get worse if you don't address it.
That's exactly right. See, it's the exact opposite. If we don't pay attention to what's going wrong, okay, we're never going to get down to the root causal factor that led to the problem to begin with, and therefore we're not going to be in an empowered position to reverse the problem and cure it and solve it. Okay, so New Age deception of ignore the negative is trying to convince people that we're giving power away to something that's harmful simply by putting our attention upon it to become aware of it and how it works. Nothing could be farther from the truth. By putting our attention upon it, we're not giving power to it. We're empowering ourselves to understand the root causal factor of the problem and therefore to put ourselves in an empowered position to solve the problem. It's the exact opposite of what the New Age community often tells us. That, they say you should never pay attention or talk about the negative. As a matter of fact, the negative should be something that we're trying to make people aware of, and then getting them down to what the causal factor. Recognize, hey, that negative manifestation, that's a symptom. Do you want to know why it's there? Well, you got to go deeper than the symptom, and you got to get down to that causal factor by looking at, hey, acknowledge this is what's going on. This is real. We need to reverse this, And when you put your attention on the negative, you're seeing what it really is. You're seeing the causal factors. That gives you the ability to protect yourself against it, mitigate its harmful effects, and maybe even avert them and reverse them entirely and come up with a solution. So, this idea of ignore the negative, nothing could be further from the truth. And all that, to be honest, all that really is that's choosing to remain unconscious of how something works. And that comes from fear.
Oh, exactly. I had an incredible example of that pop up for me not long ago. I remember speaking to somebody and the situation that was taking place in Syria had come up. And also we brought into it Palestine and whatnot and just some of the stuff going on. And it just came up in conversation. And the person, was very much minded or very much in the New Age way of thinking and very good person. But they actually told me that, because I said, well, what about these women and children, these defenseless, innocent people that are being killed en masse because of this? And actually, our tax dollars are contributing to that. And I started bringing these things up. And they're like, well, you know what? This is just something that's part of this reality. We're at this stage of growth in this particular school, and those children and those souls, they knew what they were getting into, and they chose to come here to have that experience. And we can't interfere with that process. And they started going on this whole thing, and I think I sat on the floor with my jaw just open because I didn't even know how to respond right away because it just shocked me so greatly that they could even say that.
I want to come out and just take a direct, hardcore left hook at this, okay, and just be callous, if I will, if I may.
Oh, please.
Okay, well, let me tell you what that dynamic really is, and you could tell, let the person hear this, please, by all means. It's called willful ignorance that is derived from the fear of owning one's personal responsibility that ultimately comes from being a coward, knowing that they're a coward, and having self-loathing as a result of that deep subconscious knowing, okay, that's where that comes from. Now, if that's the psychological breakdown of what's actually going on in people's mind who think like that, and they try to euphemize it and give it this nice little label called "I'm a New Age thinker." I am a New Thought person. Okay, when all they really are is a coward who knows they're a coward, who hates themselves deep down inside, and who, as a result, will refuse to own their personal responsibility to do something and will willfully choose to ignore something that is evil and running amok in the world. That's what that person is. That's what everybody who thinks like that is. Okay?
I couldn't agree more.
Now, what have I just described? I have just described a psychological and spiritual child. That's what that all those factors, all those personality traits, all of those psychological characteristics that I just described are the hallmarks of psychological and spiritual infancy. So we're looking at child issues. These are issues that are deeply embedded in the subconscious mind, okay, that have kept the people like this in a state of childhood at a psychological and spiritual level. And what a lot of my new work is going to focus on, now I'll only hint at it a little bit tonight because I want to get back to some of the New Age deceptions. But going forward, a lot of the work that I'm going to be doing is going to be dealing with subconscious issues of abandonment, childhood abandonment issues that we've never dealt with fully, that we've never really gone deep into because it's such shadow material that many people want to run away from and they don't want to confront head on. It's some of the most disturbing material that is in the human psyche. Okay? And because we don't want to do that cleansing work, dealing with abandonment issues, and these are multifaceted issues, all we really need to do is just compare what we just talked about here with a person deeply ensconced in the New Age thought, in the New Age religion, saying evil should just be allowed to go on unchecked because it's all just an experience and souls have made this choice to experience this at a soul level in some past life that we don't even know exists or not, okay? Which I do believe past lives and future incarnations do exist personally, but I certainly do not believe that we are here to just experience pure evil unchecked.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. I don't think that's what the learning experience we're here to experience on Earth is about. Pardon me for not getting on board with that, but I just think that's a ridiculous notion.
Yeah, our experience here has been hijacked. If you
that's
look at
right.
it like that, and we're part of it. We're actually complicit with that hijacking.
People like this are feeding into that very hijacking. Exactly. And that's a slave who wants to remain a slave. Yeah. And I don't really care who hears that as harsh. For people who know what my tact has been, they know I don't pull any punches and I don't sugarcoat words. I'm going to tell it like it is. And if you're offended by that, people should get as offended as they want by that. It's a slave who doesn't want to rebel against their slavery. And you know what? If you've come here on the earth now in this time, you know what you've really come here to do? You didn't come here to experience evil, run amok and unchecked. You came here to participate in a slave rebellion. That's what you spiritually came here to do. And you've been hijacked from that plan by the New Age movement. And the New Age movement was put there by the dark occultists who are in control of this planet, who are really ultimately running the plantation and keeping the slaves. They're the people who have put that ideology in your head, and you don't even understand that. These people don't even understand that the very slave masters of the plantation that they are on have given them their belief systems. They've given them their religions to control their mind and keep them a slave and get them to say ridiculous things like, we should never rebel against slavery, and it's just an experience and it was all agreed to. Well, you know what? I don't recall ever agreeing to be a slave, held against my will. This is a captive situation. This is a hostage situation. Earth and humanity are in a hostage situation. For people who don't understand that, you're completely asleep. 100% totally asleep. This is a hostage situation that we are in.
Wow,
and
that's
you know what?
Yeah.
We are here to lead the rebellion against this plantation called life on earth right now. Okay? You were spiritually put here to lead a rebellion against slavery. And the New Age movement has done a beautiful job hijacking that rebellion. A beautiful job. But to go back into this dynamic that I'm going to be talking about more and more, I'm going to be getting into how this all ties in with deeply seated in the subconscious mind childhood abandonment issues. And then a lot of my work is going to focus on what I call cosmic abandonment issues. That humanity as a whole, in the aggregate as a species, is suffering from ancient, embedded abandonment issues from our inception, our origins as a species, from deep in human antiquity. We are wrestling with cosmic parental abandonment issues, which again, that's just a little hint here today. I'll be getting into it more on future shows, and I'll of course be getting into it in future videos that I do. But when we come back after the break, maybe we could get into a little bit more of the specific deceptions that are peddled by the New Age religion.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Mark, wow, that was it was a great way to sum it up. And I think that anybody that's listening, you really need to take ear to that. You really need to take that to heart and think about that. So let's think about that for a few minutes, folks. We'll be back here with Mark Passio. We got one final segment left, so don't go anywhere. And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. We have, sadly, only one segment left remaining, but it is a good one. It's a good 26 minutes that we have here with my very special guest, Mr. Mark Passio. And his website, once again, for those who might be new to his work, is whatonearthishappening.com. It all starts with the question. It kind of reminds me of that movie, The Matrix, where the Trinity character was saying to the Neo character, it's the question that drives us. And I love that Mark's website is actually a question. And that's, I think, what started it for me back in the day when I was a young kid and I was raised in a very particular way of viewing the world. It was very much a religious mindset, and I didn't quite take to it right away, and I just started asking questions, and I just wondered, why, how could that be? And I just went into that way of thinking, and eventually I grew up a little bit more and realized that I could go out and discover information on my own, that I didn't need to have it handed down to me or spoon-fed to me by these different people. Then I could go out and gain it up myself, and would head to the library. And thank God now for the internet, because we can now have access to whole libraries of information. So right now, that anybody that's listening in, I encourage you to do the same. Keep asking the questions. Get out there and start researching the questions that you have. There's lots of information available. Of course, some of the information is definitely going to be contradicting itself when you start getting into this field, and it can be quite, I guess, daunting for the average person to try to take these subjects on, because they're so huge. There's a lot of disinformation out there, but I would just say trust your gut, develop that intuition, develop the ability to listen to your true, authentic self, not just your ego or something that's there to block your vision, but to truly connect to the real organic process of learning and growth again. And you'll be able to sidestep those deceptions every time. And so my very, very special guest, once again, is Mark Passio. We're honored to have him back on the show. And Mark, we wanted to get into some more specifics about what's behind the New Age mindset and what this really means. Because when you hear the term New Age, it seems harmless enough. I mean, we're entering a new age, a new process of development, a new stage in our development. But what this really is ultimately a package-wrapped ideology that we're talking about. It's a new religious ideology. So maybe we can break down some of the tenets of that ideology.
Sure. Well, we talked about in the last segment, ignore the negative. not focusing on anything that's wrong with the world. And, if you don't do that, you're actually giving more power to it if you ignore the negative. It's the opposite of what the New Age wants to tell you. So you have to understand the things that are wrong and then get down to the core underlying dynamics that are driving that, the causal factors, if you want to affect a solution. One of the next deceptions that is peddled by this movement is that you should never get angry and actually feel anger, that we want to purge the emotion of anger. And that's what over meditation and always doing yoga constantly is about, and you'll see even just in the way that a lot of New Agers will talk, trying to always have a calm, soothing NPR type voice, so to speak, okay? And this is, to me, actually really not truly genuine. It's like you said, it's not really being a genuine self. You're trying to play a role, and you're trying to do something that someone else told you should be doing, which is purging anger. You wouldn't be able to feel anger if there was no role for it, okay? There is a spiritual role for anger, all right? Now, don't get me wrong. Non-righteous anger, okay, that's not channeled properly, is going to be self-defeating. You're not using it to benefit yourself or society, okay? It's going to be counterproductive to your own development and counterproductive to anything you may want to do in society. But if you feel righteous anger, righteous indignation for what's really for what is bad and wrong and evil in the world, all right? And then you channel that anger to allow it to become a motivational influence, a motivation for your behavior, okay, to actually change that thing or to stop that thing from occurring. And then you use it as a motivation to create positive change, then that anger that was felt was very positive, and there was a very specific role for it in your life, and it's there to be felt. So that's another aspect that I think New Agers have really wrong. Another one we've talked about throughout the show, they think that there's no such thing as evil, that everything's just an experience, and since everything's one at a fundamental level, which I won't disagree with, at a level of universal consciousness, everything is one. But you know what? We're here on the earth right now in a state of seeming separation because we've incarnated in spirit into the physical domain to have experiences, and as such we are experiencing separateness, seeming separateness, and that doesn't mean you let evil run unchecked, because guess what, ladies and gentlemen, the experience is still real, and it still does have an effect, and it's part of the learning experience. But you don't say, well, because I understand it's an experience at a fundamental level, I'm not going to do anything to stand up against evil or resist evil. And this is so put forward in things like, for example, I'll talk about this in a moment too when I get into solipsism, the next deception. Course of Miracles wants to teach people that there's no real evil. There is evil in the world, ladies and gentlemen. There is goodness and there is evil in this world. And that's not a fake or imaginary dichotomy, and that is not something that is invented by man's mind. That is something that exists in nature, independently from man's mind. Okay? Those actual actions, those actual events, all right, those actual experiences, those are real and they exist in the real world. Okay? So it's not all good. There are things that are bad taking place. There are things that are evil taking place. There are doers of evil. There are bringers of evil. It's real. Good and evil are a real dichotomy in nature. They are not, again, a construct that are invented by man's mind. This is social Darwinism. Social Darwinism wants to tell people that, and solipsism wants to tell people that there's no such thing as good and evil, and that's also moral relativism. What that really is moral relativism, okay? Telling people there's no such thing as true good, there's no such thing as true evil. Yes, there is such a thing as good and evil, there is such a thing as right and wrong. So, that just has to be thoroughly rejected, this idea that there's really no such thing as right and wrong. It is moral relativism on its face, plain and simple, and there's no common sense in moral relativism. And again, what that leads to inevitably is social Darwinism, and then that leads to all other forms of evil. So one of the next deceptions is solipsism, and I'll spell that for listeners. For listeners who haven't heard of this ideology called solipsism, you really, really need to go and look it up and study it and understand what it is at a deep level, okay? Really understand it. Not just hear the word or say, oh yeah, I know, I kind of understand what that is. You need to study it. It's called solipsism. S-O-L-I-P-S-I-S-M. Solipsism. Solipsism is the notion that only one's mind and perceptions are sure to exist, that there is no objective truth at all. So I call this the New Age deception that one can never know anything. One can never truly know anything. Real definitive knowledge does not exist. Okay? You can never truly know anything. Solipsism. All right? Solipsists believe that there's no such thing as knowledge. Knowledge outside of one's perceptions is unsure. So there is no objective reality, and there is nothing that can be truly known about the workings of the world. Now think about that. If you accept that, you'll believe any lie. Because, hey, there is no such thing as truth. Well, I can murder at random then, because if there's no such thing as truth, it follows logically that there's no such thing as right and wrong. So I could just go up to a solipsist and shoot them in the face then, and I'm sure the solipsist wouldn't complain, you know?
Yeah.
They'll be the first person to complain and say, you tread all over my rights. Well, hey, where did rights come from if there's no such thing as knowledge and truth? You know, there's no such thing as truth. Truth is a dirty word to a solipsist. Knowledge is a dirty word to a solipsist. It's once again, what I call solipsism is it is the hallmark, it is the defining hallmark of spiritual infancy. This is, to believe this is the proof in and of itself that you are spiritually an infant, that you are a spiritual child, that you are diseased ideologically. It's psychopathology. Solipsism isn't just a religion. It isn't just a ideology. Again, I absolutely will not call it a philosophy. I refuse to refer to it as such because there's no wisdom whatsoever in it. It is an ideology that is psychopathological. You can only hold this ideology if you have a diseased psyche, if you are mentally ill. It is a mental illness, more so even than a religion or an ideology. It is a mental illness. That's what solipsism really is. And this is deeply taught in the New Age movement, particularly in Course of Miracles. Course of Miracles should be called Course in Solipsism, because all it is solipsism repackaged. That's all it really is.
I heard someone say something about Course of Miracles and having some kind of connections to some of these MK Ultra type experimental programs. So
it came right out of the CIA. Absolutely. Yeah. Definitely. There's no question about it. I feel it's another psyops. It either came out of intelligence agencies that cooked it up, or it came out directly from Tavistock Institute. One or the other, because it smacks of both. So I definitely think that it's a psyops. And you know what? The people who come out with it don't even need to be the originators of the psyops. I'll tell you how it works in the New Age publishing community. Many times, occultists come forward and teach these concepts to willing dupes, and then they package it up. They know that they're going to make a ton of money selling people what they want to hear, because that's all New Ageism is. You know, the reason I don't make and don't want to make a lot of money doing what I'm doing. I'm not in this for money. I'm in this to explain to people what's going on this planet and to help to spur a slave rebellion. That's what I'm here to do. Okay, not make fake paper Federal Reserve notes. You know, I take donations to help me do the physical things that I need to do in the world to get this message out, and occasionally sell some DVDs to get the message out to people. I give all of my info for free online, and then I do make physical DVDs from my own pocket, and will sell them to people who want them to play on a DVD player if that's the format they prefer. But you know, I'm not in this to make money. And you know what? If you're in it to make money, you're going to certainly cook up things that people want to hear. I'm telling people things that are very, very difficult for the human psyche to hear and incorporate into its understanding. And people want to reject what I'm saying. Therefore, why would I come and say all these things that people want to reject if I'm in it to make money? Well, that's what the New Age movement is all about. They package up things that, people will really want to hear this, man, and they'll eat it up with a spoon. And it's true. That's what they do. So that's how the dark occultists, they find somebody, they say, we're going to inject this into the publishing houses of the New Age. And, it's a psyops. And they bring it to an author, or they bring it to a New Age guru or teacher, and they say, you want to make a whole lot of money with this and help a whole lot of, quote unquote, help a whole lot of people in the process? Well, this willful dupe says, oh yeah, great, wonderful. If I could help people by bringing this so-called truth to them and make some money in the process because they'll buy my seminars and lectures, yeah, sure, and buy my books, I'll do it. And that's what it's all about. They're taking this fake spirituality, wrapping it up in attractive packaging and putting language that people want to hear. They'll readily accept it. And it's all bunk. It's all nonsense. It's solipsism repackaged. That's what Course in Miracles is solipsism 101. Repackaged.
We could rename the solipsism. We could rename it psyopsism.
Yeah. That would be a great way of looking at it, because that's exactly what it is. And I've told people this before. In the dark occult, one of the sins of it is solipsism. They have sins. People hear, well, in Satanism, there's sins. Yes, there are sins in Satanism. And one of the major sins to a Satanist, to a dark occultist, is solipsism. But at the same time, one of their objectives is to peddle solipsism to anyone that will swallow it. Think about that. They know it's fake. They know it's bunk. They know there's no truth in it. But if you can get somebody to believe in that, you can get them to believe in anything, because they believe that nothing is the truth, that nothing is true. And therefore, by just having them and holding them in that mindset, you could probably get them to believe anything. And that's what the New Age movement is about. That's what this religion is about.
And that's an important point that you brought up, Mark, because even when you look at some of these religions or whatever, and the fact that you have these front people out there peddling them, they don't eat off that same plate that they're selling you. They know full well. I think that's what people misunderstand when they're out there worshiping these popes and these politicians and these scientism people and all this. They don't understand that really at the top levels, those people aren't in the top levels because they just magically made it up that greasy pole and suddenly landed in that spot of influence over the masses of people. They're there because they are a specific tool for this program and for this system. So they're selling you something that even they're laughing behind those lodge doors, aren't they?
That's exactly right. Again, the notion is we know the truth. We're going to hold that back from other people, and we're going to peddle the lie to them. And they do that in the form of solipsism, and I feel that that's largely done through the New Age community today. So that's another New Age deception. Here's the next one. We've talked about this throughout, really, so we don't have to elaborate on this a ton. Never resist. There is no time for physical resistance against your captivity and slavery. And again, this is because they don't understand the self-defense principle, which needs to be studied and deeply incorporated and deeply grasped hand in hand with the non-aggression principle. The New Agers get the non-aggression principle very well, to a deep level in many cases. I'm impressed with their understanding of the non-aggression principle. But they do not have the balance that comes with understanding the sacred masculine principle of self-defense, the right to self-defense. And that's what that New Age deception of never resist anything, that if you resist, it persists, comes from. No, ladies and gentlemen, resistance against evil, resistance against tyranny is victory. That's spiritual victory. Okay? You need to resist tyranny. You need to resist evil. Okay? Not stand down and accept it and let it run roughshod all over the earth unchallenged. That's not being a spiritual human being. That's just laying down. And laying down is defeat, and resistance is victory.
And it kind
So
of makes me
that's-
think of that show Star Trek, where you have the Borg, and of course their slogan is "Resistance is futile,"
That's
and
right.
that's what they want you to think,
That's
is that
right.
it's futile for you to resist.
Right.
So just lay over and let us take over.
And I'll quote in the actor Patrick Stewart when he's fighting back, to reclaim himself against the board after they try to assimilate him into the hive mind, and he screams, "Resistance is not futile. It is not futile. It is victory. It is spiritual victory." So, this notion that we have to accept everything and never resist needs to just be wholly thrown out. It is just a complete lie of the New Age deceptions. Another thing is this watered down notion of the laws of attraction that you hear in the New Age circles.
Oh, yeah.
And the law of attraction is always packaged toward the ego. It's all geared toward the ego. Hey, you want that new job? You want that new car? You want that new house? You want to be liked by this group of people and, get this, new wardrobe or whatever? Make this much money per year? Oh, make your vision board. That's not what the laws of attraction are about. This isn't, okay, I'm not telling you that maybe you can't use certain laws of attraction in the world, the dynamics of attraction that way, okay? But that's all for ego-bound awareness. You're doing it just because you want those things. Your lowercase w will. My will wants these things. My ego, the lowercase e ego, wants these things. You're not looking at what does the universe want. Hey, what is right want to create here? What do the laws of creation and righteousness want to make happen on the earth? No, that's not. I'm not interested in morality. I'm not interested in righteousness. I'm not interested in truly understanding the difference between right and wrong behavior and developing a conscience and then living in that conscience, okay, by an act of my will. I'm interested in the cush job with the higher paycheck and the 3-car garage house and a Lexus in each garage. That's what I'm interested in. So I'm going to use the law of attraction for that. The real law of attraction is natural law. I explain that immensely in my other work. You have to understand the dynamics that ultimately bring us the consequences for the behaviors that we choose. And I've grouped that under that dynamic under the umbrella term called natural law. That's the real law of attraction. It can be summed up in the law of freedom. The law of freedom is as morality increases, freedom increases. And I'm talking about in the aggregate for a people, for an entire society, an entire species, a whole population of people. As their morality increases in the aggregate, collectively, their freedom will increase in the aggregate. As their morality decreases, their freedom will decrease, and they will go deeper into bondage and slavery as they become more of an immoral people, not concerned with the objective difference between right and wrong. That's the law of freedom, and that's the real law of attraction, essentially, the natural law. And that's what the New Agers don't really understand at a deep level. You never hear New Agers talking about natural law because it flies directly in the face of authority. And then that creates a kind of a polarizing dynamic between believers in authority and those who stand against authority, or what I've simply started calling the believers in slavery and those who oppose slavery. Okay, if you believe in authority, you are a believer in slavery, plain and simple. It's just a euphemism for slavery. So I'm an anarchist. I don't believe in the authority of man. There is no authority in man. There is only authority in natural law. The creator of the universe put those laws into effect. So if you want to call it authority in nature, if you want to call it authority in God, if you want to call it authority in moral law, I don't really care. You can call it any of those terms. I'm comfortable with them all. Okay? So that's the authority that I accept is in control of the entire universe. And no man is it. No man or woman is it. So the idea of authority vested in man is called slavery. And I stand against that. I oppose it at all times, at all places, in all of its forms. Okay? So that's the distinction we really have to understand, is that they're the only two kinds of, the only real divide between people. They say, you hear a million quotes about there's two kinds of people in the world. Okay? Well, there really is only two kinds of people, and the only real divide between people are there's believers in slavery and there's those who oppose slavery. That's it. That's the real divide. That's not an illusion. That's not a divide and conquer strategy. Okay? That one is real and it exists in nature. So just to touch on a couple of the other New Age deceptions, because I know time is running out on the show, they also have a false notion of forgiveness. The idea that forgiveness is a one-way street and this religion has a lot of this idea of turn the other cheek in modern Christianity, which certainly did not mean what people in the modern day think it meant when it was written in biblical texts. Okay, it meant give people another chance if they're willing to change.
Yeah.
Okay, it doesn't mean continuing to excuse the willful commission of wrongdoings, of evil acts, an infinite number of times, just endlessly. That's called being a punk and getting yourself smacked over and over and over and over and over and over and over, and not ever caring enough about yourself to say, hey, this needs to stop. This needs to end, and I'm not going to put up with this crap. You know? That's what somebody with real self-respect and dignity would say. They wouldn't say, oh, I continue to forgive you. You know? You could say, hey, you don't really understand this dynamic. I'm willing to forgive you, but you have to be willing to open up your mind and learn a little bit about why your actions are wrong. And then if the person can make an apology and say, I'm willing to tell the truth and that my behavior was wrong and I recognize that it caused harm to others and I don't want to do that anymore, hey, we could open our arms in forgiveness, and reconciliation can begin at that point. That's real forgiveness. Accepting people's wrong behavior and just saying, "Oh, that's how they are." That's not real forgiveness. That's punking yourself out to somebody is what that's called. So I know we're kind of at the end of the segment. We didn't get to them all, but we could pick it up another time, David. I want to thank you very much for inviting me onto the show and to cover some of these topics and I'll just let people know briefly that if you want to learn more about my take on the New Age deception and how it works on people's minds to control us and keep us in that paradigm of slavery, you can go to my website at whatonearthishappening.com. Check out my videos and my podcasts. And I do recommend going in order with the podcasts. On the podcast page, go back to number 1. Listen to them in order at your own pace and at your own leisure, and you'll get an entirely new worldview from that body of audio material up on the podcast page at whatonearthishappening.com. So, David, once again, thanks so much for inviting me onto your program tonight.
Well, Mark, it's truly an honor, and I'm very grateful that you came on, and you're more than welcome anytime. And I know you have some new projects coming up as well, and feel free at any point to drop me a line in the minute you've got some new stuff released and you want to come back. You're more than welcome, and absolutely, to continue talking about this, I'm sure we could go for a number of shows here. So let's definitely do this again, and thank you, Mark, for your time tonight.
Always a pleasure, David. Thanks so much.
I think there's a lot of good-hearted people that gravitate towards wanting to pursue knowledge and pursue truth and to go through this journey of awakening. But what tends to happen is that there's these nets that are there, and they know these people that are at the top that are running these different elements within our society, whether it be the political system, the religious system, the education system, or any system. They're constantly trying to find ways to maintain their power. And so we see new branches of these different, I guess, what you would call religions or ways of thinking or philosophies. We see new branches coming out and new ideas coming forward, and it's just important that we analyze those and take a second look at what we're bringing on board into our minds and how we perceive things. So that's what we're here to do tonight. I'm very excited, and without further ado, I want to go ahead and bring my guest on tonight. So, Mark, welcome to the show, brother, and you're on the air. Thank you for coming on the show with us tonight.
David, thank you so much for inviting me back onto the show. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm so glad you accepted my invitation. I had listened actually recently to the amazing 7-hour presentation that you put together. I was over 7 hours actually, and it was basically pointing out a lot of these different deceptions that are at work within the New Age movement, and a lot of these memes that are out there today as if these are the new ideas that are being sold to people. And what ends up happening is that no matter which way you look at it, we've got a lot of people that are just not taking action. We have people that are talking a lot. We have a lot of people that might be inspired or motivated to bring about change in their life and hopefully in the world, but they get bought, they get sold.
Okay, I'm being told that we are back live. It looks like the call dropped, our connection dropped. David is being brought back into the call. Dave, are you back up?
Hello, Mark. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I'm actually just reconnecting through my phone. I'm assuming that we're actually live on the air. Thanks for...
All right. Hello, everyone. Good evening and welcome. Welcome to the broadcast. You were listening to Truth Warrior here on Truth Frequency Radio. Sorry, there was a slight little delay there, but we are live and we are on the air. And I'm your host, David Whitehead. I'm very happy to be here with you once again. It is Monday, December 16th, and my goodness, the time sure flies by, and we're now already coming up to the end of 2013, heading into 2014 already. So I'm hoping that we have a little bit more success in this year, 2014, with helping to awaken people up and trying to spread this information, inspire people to look at things in a different way, to take action. And we are here tonight. I'm joined tonight with Mark Passio from whatonearthishappening.com. I've always loved the name of that site because when you look around at things in the world, you can't help but just ask. If you have even a basic understanding of things, you're going to ask that question: what is happening? Because what we're told that's happening and what we see happening are two very different things. And I'm very excited to have him on to talk about exactly what is happening on this planet, because that's really what the goal is. We're here to discover truth. We're here to ask the deeper questions, and we're here to get into this whole new realm of thinking. And I think that as we're moving forward into this next year, it's definitely going to take a lot of tenacity. It's going to take a lot of courage on the part of most people to take that next step, to illuminate their minds, to move forward in their journey, and not just settle for maybe the first perspective they were given, or settle for the first answers that they were told by, especially those in what they call authority. And we're here to sort of break down a lot of the deceptions that are out there, especially within what has become known as the New Age community. There's a lot of deception at work there, definitely.
And out of the sails of this movement of people really trying to stand up to the system and to take positive action. So maybe we could start with that and get your take
Sure.
on how that manifested.
Absolutely. I call this entire movement the religion of standing down. That's really what they're peddling to the masses of people who buy into this movement. And again, as you said, they're very often well-intentioned individuals. They can often see the control system that's in place. They can see a lot of the evil and the things that really shouldn't be the way that they are in our world. And they have a lot of intention to want to do good and to want to change themselves above all. And those are both great things. But when it comes to actually standing up for oneself and one's rights and taking a stance against people who are doing things that aren't within their rights, this idea that we don't have a right to stand up for our rights and stop those who would attempt to thwart our rights is rampant within the New Age community. In other words, what their main ideology seems to be is that is being peddled to them is all of the violence that is done to us can be done to us, but we may never resist that violence physically with any amount of physical force. And that's a very dangerous precedent to set, that there is never a time to use physical force, a highly, highly dangerous precedent. Because if you don't understand both principles of enlightenment, it is my contention that you are not enlightened, that you are absolutely unconscious, and you are being led down the garden path, as it were, to really down the path to the road to slaughter. There's two basic principles that have to be understood deeply and observed deeply when it comes to truly being aware.
Getting me back on the air here.
Yes, it looks like your internet connection dropped out there. I was testing my connection, thinking mine may have dropped, but mine was solid the whole time. So
yours is good. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we're still on the air, so we'll just go with this for now until the break, and then I'll try to get my other signal lined up there. So sorry about that, folks.
Oh, no problem. Hey,
sorry about
technical difficulties happen in this business. It happens.
Oh yeah, we don't have the multi-millions of dollars to have these really secure networks and all of this. So anybody that's listening, of course, people like Mark and myself, we do this, on our own dime and on our own time, and it can be, a little bit stressful from time to time. But
That's right.
this is what it's all about. It's grassroots. It's people getting together, and we're just using the best technology that we have at our disposal to try to get this very important message out. So I'm not sure at what point we were cut off there, Mark, but I was just trying to basically bring up the subject that we definitely wanted to talk about tonight, which was the subject of the deceptions that are at work, especially right now. And I'm sure you can feel this and you can see this happening, but as this movement has grown of awareness and people wanting to seek truth and not just accept what they're given from these establishment sources or from these authority figures or from what they're getting from churches or whatever, it seems to be that there's these other nets that are forming to catch those people and to draw them in to these deceptions. And these deceptions are things like, not standing up and not taking action. There's this meme out there, which is, very much rampant in the New Age movement, which is, what you resist persists. So don't resist. Just sit back, be complacent, focus only on yourself, and everything will just heal on its own. Evil is a natural part of this reality, so there's really nothing we can do to fix it, so all you can do is work on yourself, and it just seems to be that people take that very literally and they don't apply it any further, and I feel like it's sort of taking the wind
awake. And I think that any individual that does not wholly recognize both of these principles is not awake at all whatsoever. And many people will hear this and they'll hear it as harsh, and they'll, say, well, that's not what I was taught, or this isn't what my guru told me or my teacher told me. And I keep trying to explain to people that if a so-called spiritual teacher is not teaching people both of these principles in a very, very fundamental way, then they're a false teacher. They're not really teaching people true spiritual enlightenment. They're teaching them either some form of aggression or some form of pacifism, both of which are what we're trying to actually eliminate. We don't want any sort of aggression. We want people to recognize the non-aggression principle. The non-aggression principle is very simple. Do not initiate coercive force against your fellow beings. That's it. Very simple. It can't be any simpler than that. The person who is initiating or starting the usage of coercive force against another being is in the wrong 100% of the time. They are not correct in what they are doing. They are committing a wrongdoing, and that is against natural law. But coincident with that principle, you need to truly deeply understand the self-defense principle, which is the principle that if another being is initiating undue coercive force against you and your rights, you maintain at all times and places the right to physically and forcefully defend yourself with the defensive use of force to put down that act of aggression. That is a defense of your rights, a defense of your property, a defense of your being, life, liberty, and property.